Hi, I'm Blair Bisher with BPB Counseling, where I work with men who are trying to do three things: understand, overcome, and heal from problematic sexual behavior. This most commonly looks like porn addiction, sex addiction, repeated infidelity. And today, what I wanted to do was walk you through my curriculum that I've put together, both for individuals interested in working with me, as well as refreshers for clients that I've worked with, as well as partners who have been hurt, betrayed, or are concerned that that your partner might be addicted to porn, sex, and are trying to find help. So this curriculum I've put together because I believe that this really is the foundation of what someone needs to understand if they want to move in a healthier direction, however they would define that direction. What interests me, both professionally and academically, is sustainable sexual integrity. Right. So this is what I have really focused on and understanding in my doctoral work, as well as in practice, is trying to understand and challenging this idea that relapse is a part of recovery. You know, the trans theoretical model of behavior change delineates that relapse is a part of recovery, that it's a part of behavior change, that we're going to have these cycles. And I think it's fair to challenge that. I think it's fair to ask the question, is it possible to find and achieve sustainable sexual integrity? I believe it is. And that's what my focus is. And so that's the curriculum that I will walk you through. I'm also a professor at two universities here in Boston. And so I enjoy putting together a curriculum. It keeps everybody on track. I enjoy homework assigned for each session. These are not requirements, the sessions themselves, the homework. Everything is up to the individual. If you feel like this might be helpful, great. If you want to cut some options out, that's fine too. If you want to go longer and spend more time and go off the path and talk about different things, that's certainly possible as well. But at least this way, we have a guidepost that can bring us back and really keep us on track. And these are the things that I believe are most important for an individual to achieve sustainable sexual integrity. The big idea here is it's not about stopping a behavior. It's not about a problem. It's about becoming an expert on myself. If I can really become an expert on myself and understand how this behavior made sense. What need was this solving for? How actually was this behavior a solution? What was it solving for? That's where I want to begin. And the more that an individual can move in this direction of self-expertise, which I'll show you some examples of exactly what that looks like and tools and frameworks that I've created to help individuals get to this place of self-expertise, that's where sustainable sexual integrity lies. So it's not holding my breath, hoping for the best, but it's actually becoming an expert as to what's going on inside of me. And I believe it's fair to say that for most men, this is not something that generally is taught. To understand your feelings, to understand what inadequacy and humiliation and abandonment and worthlessness, what these things feel like. We know angry, we know hungry, we know horny, but what about all these other big emotions? Generally, we're not taken to what I call the emotional Home Depot. We know what a Sawzall is. We know how to build a fence for many men, but we're not very good at identifying when failures coming up inside of me, embarrassments coming up inside of me. And so that's where we want to move in this direction. So the very first session is going to be an orientation intake session where we want to understand how long has this behavior been a problem? Let's name all the behaviors. Is it porn? Is it chat sites? Is it infidelity? Is it strip clubs? Is it escorts? Is it massage parlors? What behaviors are a problem? How long have they been a problem? How do I know they're a problem? What's the negative consequence inventory, right? What are the negative consequences? Why is this a big deal? Why is this a problem? Is it just a problem to my partner or is it a problem to me? Why is that? It's something I shouldn't be doing. Says who? Right? We have to be able to answer all of these questions, and we really begin digging into that in the first session. A ton of homework is given at the first session. I've created a daily check-in for the individual to really begin practicing these muscles of self-awareness and self-regulation out of the very first session. The feelings wheel, beginning to identify all the feelings that are coming up for the individual, as well as beginning to really consider transparency, beginning to really consider what's helping them in terms of process, which we'll get into more in a little bit here. And then lastly, out of that first session, defining very clearly the beginnings of a relapse prevention plan, which would look something like the 3 circles exercise, right? What is relapse? Let's define it, right? I've always said in my experience, relapse comes in 3 ways. Number 1, it comes in surprises, right? I'm prepared for all these types of situations and all these types of triggers, but I was not prepared for this. It comes in the realm of isolation, right? I'm doing this alone. And if I'm trying to do this alone, that can be very challenging. I do run a group on Thursday nights. One of the purposes of that group is to break up isolation, if nothing else. But there are other people that are trying to figure this out as well and are making great strides. And then lastly is ambiguity. If I'm not really clear on what is relapse, if I'm not really clear on what is middle circle in this 3 circles exercise, what are the things that drive me to relapse potentially? Not every time, but sometimes, right? Is it okay for me to go on Reddit? Well, sometimes it drives me to acting out. Sometimes it doesn't, right? So really understanding middle circle, things that aren't relapse, but sometimes push me in the direction and understanding that. So clearing up ambiguity and starting to build out this relapse prevention plan with that 3 circles exercise. And lastly, in that first session, we want to set a goal. We really want to set a goal. Where do you want to go with this? What would you like to see accomplished in our time together? We're not going to focus so much on what it is that you don't want to do. We want to focus on what it is that you do want, what it is that you're seeking, right? I've always said that sobriety can look like absence or presence, right? Your sobriety can be the absence of behavior, the things I'm trying not to do. And I wake up today and, okay, I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to do it. That's pretty difficult to live that way forever. Or my sobriety can look like presence. What am I filling my life up with? The presence of what? What is this beauty that I'm seeking to bring into my life? And so that's what we want to work to understand. The second session, we're going to really dive into the addiction cycle and really understanding the cycle of behavior, start to finish. Okay, so what scenarios are most problematic? In those scenarios, what triggers things to begin in motion? All right, sometimes when I'm in that scenario, travel for work. Sometimes I act out, sometimes I don't. Surprise downtime. Well, I thought I had a full day, but now I've got time off. What do I do with this time off? Sometimes I act out, sometimes I don't. Wanting to understand, well, what triggers those days where sometimes I'm acting out? What's going on there, right? Ultimately, that's where the need is starting to come in. So really understanding as an expert, what is the need that's coming up where acting out makes sense? Even though I know there's negative consequences, even though it may not align with my values, acting out now becomes a solution. A solution for what? We need to understand that. And my proposal is that this is a need. This is a need that has to be solved for. And so now we get to interventions, right? What interventions can be leveraged to help meet that need? I believe if it's a need, it has to be resolved, right? It can't simply be ignored. It can't be distracted. I can't just stay busy. I can't just work out anytime I'm triggered. We've got to meet that need. But if I don't understand my feelings and emotions and triggers and what's coming up for me, well, then I can't meet the need, right? I'm trying to answer a question that nobody's asking. It doesn't matter if I got the right answer. I got the wrong question. So we've got to really understand that. The homework there is then to go and do the self-application, really beginning to understand all of those different components so that I can, when there is a need arising, stay out of the cycle of problematic behavior and land at a place that it's at least less destructive and hopefully over time, healthier and healthier. Then we want to look at defense mechanisms. Oftentimes, I will hear partners ask the question, very good question, that we need an answer to. You said you loved me. Yet you were lying to me and doing all of this over here, so you didn't love me. My whole life was a lie. Our relationship's a lie. I don't know who you are anymore. Okay? And there has to be an understanding to respond to that. And I think that begins with understanding the defense mechanism that the individual was leveraging. And there can be many different defense mechanisms, but we have to really begin to understand the defense mechanism that's at play so that we can try and answer the question, how could I go and act out and then go on date night with my partner the same night? How could I do that? At some level of the brain, there's a rationalization that's taking place. And so we really have to get into that to understand it historically, but we also want to understand looking ahead, right? What defense mechanism would show up in the future, right? So we're not going to get into the specific mechanisms now, but there's three most common that I've seen in my work, and that's kind of what I'm interested in focusing on, but then helping the individual for homework explore what other defense mechanisms could have been at play historically, and in the future could potentially trip them up. Next, we would go into process. What is my process? Some people would call this program, but I would define an individual's process as they're striving for sustainable sexual integrity. Process equals the things that an individual does to move them in a healthier direction. So my process are the things that I do to be healthier. Not healthiest, not perfect, but healthier. Now, when we understand process, we really have to break out here, and this is a big part of the homework. What are the things that I do preventatively, and what are the things that I do as an acute response in a triggered scenario? And these are very different, and we need to understand them. So maybe every day, think about it personally, I may take a multivitamin every day. Well, if I'm having a heart attack, I'm not going to take a multivitamin, right? In the same way, if I have a cut on my finger, well, I'm not going to call 911, right? That's an acute response. However, if I'm having a heart attack, time to call 911. Same thing here. We need to understand the different pathways, how I respond preventatively with respect to my process. These are the things that I do to move me in a healthier direction. And when I'm in these scenarios, here are the things that I can do as an acute response that can help me. How am I measuring success there? Perfection? What does that look like? So we need to really begin to understand this idea. Next, we need to understand intrinsic motivation. The big question here that's important as we talk about sustainable sexual integrity is who gets to decide how your day goes? Does your boss? Does the stress at work? Does your partner? Does the weather? Does your favorite sports team? Who gets to decide how your day goes? And my proposal is that it comes down to empowerment. An individual who's operating from an empowered position is going to be able to most successfully achieve sustainable sexual integrity. And so that's what we really want to focus on, is understanding this intrinsic versus extrinsic drivers of most difficult emotion. What are the difficult emotions? What drives those emotions? And what of those emotions are within me and my control? And what are outside of me and my control? Then, if it's in my control, great news, I can do something about it. What could I do? If it's outside of my control, can I bring it inside my control? It's a little tricky. Or can I relegate it to the abyss and not worry about it anymore? So intrinsic, extrinsic, an individual has to have a death grip, expertise level of understanding of what drives their difficult emotions. What are those difficult emotions? Of those difficult emotions, which ones are the most difficult? The boogeyman? And how do I, with respect to the intrinsic items, how do I regulate them, move those in more manageable ways, and for the extrinsic items, navigate those? Next, we want to understand shame and internalization. Right? Shame is, as we talk about problematic sexual behavior, shame is something that comes up for most men. If you don't have a good answer, shame shows up. Why was I doing this? How could I do this? How could I hurt the people that I love and care about? How could I act against my own stated values and belief system? If I don't have a good answer, shame shows up. If I don't have a good answer, internalizing shows up. I guess I'm the problem. I don't know why. So I guess I'm the problem. Very common experience. The tough part, the research is very clear that shame and internalization is going to continue to create cycles of emotional discomfort or pain. And as somebody who's historically self-medicated emotional discomfort or pain through acting out, well, that's where they're going to go back to. Makes sense, right? It's a solution. It's a medication that unfortunately has incredible negative consequences. And so we have to blow up this shame. We've got to be able to understand it, validate it. Love Brene Brown's work on shame resilience and really being able to move in the direction of shame resilience. My preferred approach is getting a really good answer. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, I'm really upset about it. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, but I've got a great answer in understanding that they're trying to drive their loved one to the emergency department before they die, well, now I'm not upset with them. Right? Now it's understandable. I've got a good answer as to why they were doing what they were doing. So we really want to understand why an individual is moving in certain directions. And in doing that, we can alleviate shame and internalization much of the time. Wanting to look at attachment styles, I'll couple all of these next three together. We've got childhood and the impact of childhood. We've got neglect, trauma, what type of household I was raised in, and attachment style coming into this as well. How do I attach to other human beings? We know that there's certain types of households that if an individual grows up in, there's a greater likelihood that they're going to move in the direction of problematic dysfunctional behavior as a pattern in their life. So we want to walk through really understanding what types of households those are, which one you grew up in, and really being able to break that down and understand that, right? So that we can, again, move in this direction of self-expertise. I think the big question here that we want to get to in understanding is, when does the individual, very simply put, not feel like it's okay to just be them? When did that start? That just to be Blair was not okay. You had to shapeshift. You had to be something else. You learned that when you blew bubbles in your milk at the dinner table, that was something that was going to get a fork thrown at your head. Or maybe sometimes you came home and you had straight A's and everybody celebrated and you went out to Sizzler. And then other times you got straight A's and nobody cared. Maybe you grew up in certain environments where you had to learn very quickly that you needed to be something different, better, other than what felt natural to you. Dysfunctional, problematic, addictive behavior can very much be a release valve for individuals trying to find a safe space where they feel like it's okay to just simply be themselves. And so we want to really understand the facets that come into play here. And then ultimately those young childhood experiences play into addiction. But we also have this idea of human attachment. How do human beings attach to one another? Ultimately wanting to move to this space of secure attachment or safe vulnerability. But many times, especially when addiction has come into the picture, that is not something that was modeled for me, and is not something that I know how to do. So I avoid, I shut down, I stonewall, I catastrophize and become super anxious. What does that look like for me? Right? We have to understand this component of it so that an individual can move in healthier directions in their relationships. At this point, really in the curriculum, we are starting to put together a rather robust relapse prevention plan. But we're going to go a little bit deeper on this relapse prevention planning. And there's a couple different exercises that we were going to go into here for homework, but really continuing to build up and flesh out a bit more of a comprehensive relapse prevention plan, and then a little bit of a kind of fire drill relapse prevention plan. But then there's my favorite. In the event that there is relapse, it's not the end of the world. And I know that's a contentious statement, and I understand that. But where a lot of damage can be done is when there is relapse, but relapse was never a possibility. And even if I've relapsed at a place that's not near where my behaviors used to be before I started to get help, well, now I guess I'm, quote, back at square one. I guess everything was for nothing. All this time, effort, energy, money, everything. I knew I couldn't do it. All those self-critical thinking and belief and shame and guilt and despair comes back in. And there's no plan at that point, and things can really go off the rails. So we are not condoning relapse. We're not even saying relapse has to happen or will happen, like it's stated in the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. What we are saying is it's better to have a bounce back plan and not need it than need it and not have it, right? And I think it's a little bit of an imaginal exposure therapy to be able to consider, okay, what would that look like? You can even role play often here. What would my relapse look like? How would I navigate that? What would I do with that? What tools do I have? Do I have the tools? And then if that happened, how would I navigate the aftermath? What would that look like? Understanding I would be in this kind of altered mental state and really trying to explore that space, right? So all of that coming together in this relapse prevention planning effort. Then kind of coming into this space, one of my favorites is intimacy, really understanding the role of intimacy. Sometimes this session gets bumped up, but I think the individual really has to understand if you're wanting to achieve sustainable sexual integrity, you have to understand your relationship with intimacy. And we'll look at this intimacy breakout and really try to understand the different facets. A lot of times there'll be partners who say, hey, look, I'm here for you. Whatever you need. You don't have to turn to porn. You don't have to turn to escorts or I'm here. I love you. I'm ready. Let's connect. Let's be intimate. And yet the individual may choose to go outside of their primary relationship. And this is where intimacy can play a big part. Why does that moving outside of the relationship, away from the partner, what is being achieved there that can't be achieved in the relationship? This typically will come down to safety. Where does the individual feel safe? And if I turn to my partner, is that risky? I could be rejected. Maybe I'm going to have performance challenges, right? Maybe I don't know how to regulate. Maybe I start to get critical of myself. And thoughts start to run in my head and I become anxious. And then the next thing I know, this is a disaster. And I'm feeling all kinds of difficult emotion. But if I just go to porn, well, that's easy. I'm in control. I get to decide 5 minutes or 5 hours. And if it ever feels uncomfortable to me, I just X out and I'm done. Certainly not real intimacy, artificial intimacy, transactional intimacy, as opposed to vulnerable, relational, real intimacy. And so wanting to understand these breakouts of intimacy and how they've applied. When did they begin? You weren't born with this breakout. So really understanding at what point this dysfunctional pattern started to set in and how has this taken hold in an individual's life. Next, we kind of get into core values, which really leads us into identity. When we look at motivators of behavior change, we want to understand what is motivating that change. And from a sustainability perspective, we really want to understand what can most successfully motivate change for the duration. And we'll look at 3 of the most common motivators for behavior change, but core values ultimately are going to play a significant part of this that we want to consider as well. But identity, love, fear, and many other motivators that we want to look at and consider their role in sustainability as we talk about sexual integrity. Who am I? Identity. Do I have an identity crisis? I think I'm this, but maybe I'm this, right? I think I'm this, but show me your schedule. Does your schedule back up what I believe to be? So really playing in that space of core values. 2 more sessions left. We have this partner betrayal that we want to talk about for the individuals that are in relationships. Oftentimes this moves, it can move all the way up to one of the early sessions, but really wanting to understand what is my partner's experience? How do I navigate this? How do I help my partner? And really wanting to be able to help clients that I work with understand both the impact that's been had and also how to help the partner navigate what is going on for the partner, what is happening in the partner realm, and working in that space together. Lastly is what I have called the self-expertise presentation. And, I want you to see this graphic where we've got this guy in the middle, all these different thought bubbles around him. And my proposal is that if an individual can present at an expert level on these topics, then they are in a position to be able to achieve sustainable sexual integrity. And so many times for clients that are willing and interested and able, I would have them give a presentation on these topics, effectively answering 3 questions. How did I get here? How did I get stuck? And how can I be confident that the future will be different, not hopeful? So really wanting to move in this direction of self-expertise. Other things that I've created that I really thought would be helpful is I created this sexual addiction toolkit graphic. I want people that I work with to really understand, here are the tools that are at your disposal. So when you're feeling dysregulated, when you're in a difficult space, what tools do I have? Well, here you go. And so for partners, what's going to be different this time? Well, again, if the individual was not taken to the emotional Home Depot and taught how to navigate and identify and stay with or regulate what's going on inside of them, it's understandable that these dysfunctional or maladaptive behavior patterns took hold. And so we need new tools. Oftentimes, the problem's not the individual, the problem's the process, or the problem's the lack of awareness or tools. I enjoyed putting this together, and I even recommend daily. Use these tools daily. These are at your disposal. Weekly, here are things that I propose that you check in on weekly, monthly, etc. So in closing, that's an overview of the curriculum as I like to work through with clients. Again, it's up to the individual what they're interested in working in. We can always go deeper, further, different directions. But I hope that helps you to have an idea of what working together would look like if you wanted to work with me. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. You can always schedule an initial consult through the website. And I thank you for taking this time.